Hello everybody, my name is Kip Crate, and today we are talking about the heavy side chick for when the stock just feels a little inadequate. She's big, she's bad, and she takes the starring role of every scout main's nightmares, and her name is Natascha. Now, to start things off, let me explain how this is going to go down with a little disclaimer. This is my video and therefore my opinion, but I try to use as much fact as possible. But if you still disagree with my video, that is your prerogative, and I'm very interested in hearing your opinion, so please put your thoughts down in the comments. But if you disagree with me, please disagree with me with some sort of actual basis. Please don't just be cancerous in the comment section. Please. This series is going to take a look at each weapon, looking at the stats, strats, and psychology of each of these weapons to determine what makes them so special. We'll be looking at multiple categories, rating each attribute on a scale of 1 to 10, then averaging the total to give the weapon an overall score. And the categories will be as follows: aesthetic, power, range, targeting, accuracy, mobility, versatility, balance, ease of use, and fun. Alright, so now that we got all that out of the way, let's get into this. Like the stock minigun, the Natascha is simply designed. But it's bigger, and everyone loves bigger. But it gets better. Listen to this. I mean, there is no sound in all of TF2 that is sexier. I don't care what anyone says. That deep roar and bassy pounding of the shots, this gun just feels and sounds incredibly empowering. And overall, this gun just feels extremely powerful, and that's despite the 25% damage penalty. The look alone is a confidence boost, and it's intimidating to any opponent smart enough to see or hear the Mistress of Misery coming their way. Overall, this gun looks, sounds, and feels badass, and is a major psych boost for its users, so I give it a 10 out of 10. Also, on a side note, it's fairly easy to get these weapons in strange and killstreak varieties. The Natascha isn't used all that much in higher tier loadouts, but it really does stand out in a crowd. Like my strange professional killstreak Natascha, it gets the look over anytime I whip that baby out. So if you're interested in getting a Natascha and you want it to stand out a little bit, just know it's fairly easy to get what you're looking for. So have at it. Yeah! As big and bad as it looks and sounds, the Natascha has a lot more bark than bite when it comes to pure killing power. It takes a 25% chunk out of the stock's damage, meaning its highest DPS is 320 to 400 at point blank. That's still a relatively high damage rate considering the other classes and their DPSs, and it mows down almost any class other than a heavy in about a second ideally, like the stock. But going up against another heavy with any amount of overheal, you're going to be at a serious disadvantage, because most other weapons are going to do at least 100 DPS more than you while revving faster. So you're kind of screwed in the heavy v heavy matchup, and it's not a very strong option against sentries either. And at mid, that damage drops down to 30 to 200, and at long, it is an absolutely pathetic 30 to 60 DPS. Its strength comes more from the slowdown, which allows you to hold opponents while your bullets pummel them to death, but that's more or less at mid to close range. It's strong enough to do its job and hold the line when it needs to, but it's by far the weakest option when it comes to terms of pure power, so I give it a 5 out of 10. On a side note, however, the Natascha is an immeasurable offensive asset when compared with a Kritzkrieg, where the inescapable stream combines with the triple power of crits to make for an easy area wipe when needed. As stated earlier, the Natascha doesn't have the power of the stock, and putting that at range, and it becomes damn near powerless. I mean, there really isn't much to say about it. Miniguns in general have a lot of spread, making it difficult to do damage with it at longer ranges, and reducing damage certainly doesn't help. In addition, the slowdown effect is also reduced at range, making that utility much more difficult to utilize at long range. However, at close range, this weapon is perfect. This weapon easily prevents other classes from closing in, retreating, or circle strafing around you, making close range engagements easy, where the stock has a lot of risk involved with opponents that can easily outmaneuver you. So overall, the Natascha works best at close to mid-range, allowing you to use the best DPS ranges of the miniguns and hold opponents there, which is a good deal, even if it costs a little or a lot of damage. So I'll rate the Natascha's ranging a 6 out of 10. It isn't quite as long as the stocks, but you're much more enabled to use it at close range where even the stock has trouble.
Eleanor! God save the Queen!
The Natascha works really well when you target right. The slowdown effect is especially helpful when targeting highly mobile classes like Scout, Pyro, or Spy. The slowdown even affects blast jumping soldiers, demos, and demo shield charges. So choose the right opponent, the ones relying on the mobility, and you can easily shut them down. That said, it's still a minigun and a hit scan weapon, so if there's no line of sight, you're not hitting anything. But if there is a line of sight and you start hitting, the slowdown makes it very hard to escape. So it's easier than ever to keep the enemy where you want them. So, as far as targeting goes, I rate the Natascha a 6 out of 10. As stated with the targeting, the slowdown makes it easier than ever to land your pellets on an opponent. So, while each shot does less damage, you're going to be able to land more shots much more easily with much more consistency. The tracking of the Natascha is what really sets apart this weapon. The slowdown effect forces you to kind of flick onto opponents like you would with a normal minigun, but the moment you start getting them into the stream, you have to shift into a smoother, slower track, and it takes some getting used to. However, this slowdown and tracking style really lends itself to a rather interesting mind game, as the slowdown and shift is affected by range, allowing you to utilize every little movement you make, every little strafe and push and retreat to really affect that slowdown and kind of influence your opponents to move the way you want them to, thus giving you a degree of control over your opponent that a heavy doesn't usually have. Like with the stock minigun or any other minigun, how the opponent moves is going to affect how you track, that you are meant to follow them. The Natascha allows you to kind of decide where they're going to go since they have a much more limited ability to move. In summation, the Natascha makes it easier than ever for a heavy to keep his opponents and his bullets where he wants them. So on accuracy, I will give it a 7 out of 10. This minigun, sadly though, is even slower than the stock when it comes to wind-up time, taking 1.16 seconds to wind up, or a 30% increase on spin-up and spin-down time, making it much more necessary and difficult to jump rev. It's relatively easy to work around like the stock, it just takes practice. It's still a downgrade on mobility though, and limits you just a little bit more, so I have to rate the mobility a 2 out of 10. This weapon is great for handling rushes and retreats, and mobility-heavy players such as scouts and pyros, making it especially useful on defense, allowing you to slow the enemy to prevent them from reaching certain areas like carts and points, while wasting their time to kill them. Offensively, it's much more difficult to use, but can still counter the mobility of the enemy and make a great flanking and supportive weapon. It can be quite useful in many situations with practice, but it isn't perfect, as the damage penalty and slower rev time can be really punishing at times. And the Natascha is best used on a supporting heavy in matches where another heavy or powerhouse class is handling the brunt of the front line, while you provide more or less the slowdown to hold the enemy in place and allow your team to move forward. Overall, it's useful, but more or less situational, and best suited to defensive, supportive, and anti-mobility roles, making it just less versatile than other weapons, so I rate it a 6 out of 10. Now this is probably going to be one of the most debatable parts of this video. The Natascha to me is mostly balanced, and it's kind of an equalizer, forcing enemies to the same slow waddle as the heavy, forcing fight by removing flight, and it makes it much more difficult to abuse by reducing the damage and that increased rev time. And the defensive buff is a nice touch to make an overall nice package for a solid defensive stonewall heavy. However, many feel that it isn't so balanced, especially those who play mobility classes like Scout or Pyro, because in a game where mobility is the key for winning, weapons that can shut down the ability to rush and retreat are very, very aggravating to play against. And to understand that point of view, I actually had a friend of mine join me in a server where he gladly slaughtered me while I felt the effects of the Natascha on classes that actually have any mobility to lose. Now, one thing I do have to say that did feel a little strange was how the slowdown functions, which is more of a split-second stun, stutter-stepping you in a manner that makes you think you're lagging or losing frames rather than being slowed down by a weapon. That said, I did find that engaging the Natascha at mid-range and keeping it to a hit-and-run style of attack was able to keep the Natascha at bay, so I don't feel that the Natascha is by any means unfair or overpowered. Still, a little work would be nice to make it just a little bit smoother and a little bit more fair feeling, so I will give it a 5 out of 10. The Natascha functions very differently from the other miniguns, changing the matchups and playstyle of the heavy, and the slowdown changes the tracking entirely. So it takes some practice, but if you put a little work into it, it's not too hard to figure out, and pays off with a very solid defensive heavy. But as you develop your heavy game and use the Natascha more, you'll find her to be a bit of a demanding mistress, taking more practice to fully master her nuances, some of which are more subtle than others, and it takes some serious work to figure it all out. So while anyone can pick it up and catch a few kills with the Natascha, it takes some considerable effort to truly master her as a weapon. So I will rate the ease of use as a 6 out of 10. This minigun is extremely satisfying to use. Watching people struggle to escape is hilarious, and seeing the powerlessness of your opponents, along with the extreme badassness of the Natascha's beautiful rev and firing sounds, it's just incredibly fun and empowering to use. In addition, it's by far the closest the heavy has to a new playstyle in my opinion, as the Natascha completely changes how you handle a minigun, providing a really interesting and fresh way to use your favorite Russian man mower. So, once more, on fun, a minigun gets a 10 out of 10.
You did well!
Now, overall, the Natascha will be rated a 6 out of 10. It has a very nice niche and is great to use, but it's still somewhat situational. You're not going to be able to handle all situations as well as the stock, but it's still a good choice, especially if there's a bunch of scouts or other highly mobile players on the other team. This is by far my favorite unlock for the heavy, if not the entire game, and I'd highly recommend trying it out. If not to learn the playstyle, than for the simple fun of it. It's a breath of fresh air for those wanting to try a new way to play heavy in a useful manner, and is really rewarding to go on kill streaks that will confound and amaze both teams. In addition, I consider this to be one of the 3 miniguns that are actually useful. The stock, the Tomislav, and the Natascha, which all have their own particular style in their place. And the Natascha is just a very, very solid weapon for handling defensively. And I really enjoy that. If you haven't noticed much about my loadout or the way I play very defensively. So having a weapon that's very tiered towards handling defensively and stonewalling the enemy is just overall very enjoyable for me personally. Now, I think that Natascha is doing pretty well how it is right now, but I would like to see a slight increase in bullet spread and fire rate to allow a bit of a wider net for the Natascha to suppress enemy movements. Maybe put in a few extra pellets in that as well. This would limit the effective range of the Natascha, forcing the heavy to really get close to do a lot of damage, but it would severely punish anyone foolhardy enough to engage the heavy at close range, while also allowing a wider area of effect that allows the Natascha to provide pressure and suppression on larger groups of enemies, doing little damage but forcing them to kind of stutter step around trying to advance. Also, in order to address the lag-like stutter step that the slowdown does cause, it would be nice to see a slowdown as an overtime effect rather than a per-shot stun, which would make the slowdown more consistent for enemies, making it feel much more fair to play against for mobility-heavy classes. Do you agree with my assessment of the Natascha? Did you not? Do you have a few extra insights to share? Tell me in the comments. Next up, I'll be taking on the Tomislav, but after that, I will be scraping the bottom of the barrel for the last 2 heavy primaries, and it'll be up to you to decide which one I do first, the Brass Beast or the Hulong Heater. Anyway, I hope you really enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, subscribe, and share, and I'll see you in the next video.